Hello, it is Throwback Thursday, September 14th, 2023. Steve Sipress here, and I'm wearing one of my New York Mets shirts. This one is a silly New York Mets Hawaiian shirt because we're talking a little baseball here. I saw the news yesterday. You may have seen it, not likely. But if you pay attention to the world of advertising like I do, you see this kind of stuff and business growth. And so a company called the Sporting News took on, got an investment of $15 million. And one of the investments they made is to buy out a fantasy sports game company, and they're going to launch it in their online website, on their online platform, because they believe that instead of just going for advertising dollars and paid views and impressions and all that, they want to build what their CEO called LTV, lifetime value. And certainly running a fantasy sports game, if you do it right and gets loyal fans, that can be continuous income over and over and a great lifetime value. And almost nobody in the world knows it better than me, because I started from scratch way back in 1984, what became just a few years later the world's largest fantasy sports game company. So I was one of the pioneers of the industry, if you didn't know that, one of the first companies, and very quickly became the largest company. Now, later on, I screwed it up, but that's another story for another day. And it just so happens, when I saw the story about the Sporting News and fantasy sports, I'm like, how about that? Because I built that company by running an extremely successful ad. Obviously, it helped launch the company, and very soon later became, I got an offer to invest in the company at a valuation of $4.75 million about 3 years later. So this was a fantastic ad. And I ran that ad in one place and one place only, in the classified section in the back pages of an obscure sports publication known as The Sporting News. So what do you know? Now the Sporting News decides they're getting into the fantasy sports game business. So that I use the WOW strategy, and if you want to know how it can work for you, I created a video for you. You just go to www.thewowstrategy.com, and you'll say, wow, holy moly, building my business and running successful advertising and marketing and sales campaigns is simpler and easier. Well, maybe not easier, but it's simpler than you thought, and certainly simpler than all the big gurus and experts like to make it out to be, because they want to keep selling you lots of their stuff. The WOW strategy is the way to do it. And first W stands for the target who that you want to do business with you. And I targeted serious, rabid, out of control, over the top, deadly serious sports fans. My game was not for the casual sports fan. Nowadays, fantasy sports, anyone can go on their phone or computer and draft a team and see how they did. And mine were season-long games. So, and in fact, I had lifetime leagues where people kept their teams from year to year and year, and I put each, number of teams depending on the sport, 12 teams, 14, 16, 18, depending on the sport, I put a number of people in a league where they got to know each other, and just like in Major League sports, they would call each other up and make trades. They would trade their players, and they would draft players, and they would trash talk each other, and they would gloat after beating their opponent. They'd call them up and gloat, or they just call them up because I had people all over the world, certainly all over the country, in my fantasy sports leagues. And back then there was no internet, so my customers, my members, my clients, whatever you want to call them, they would call each other up just to find out if so-and-so is playing tonight. The third baseman for the Atlanta Braves, they'd call somebody in their league that was near Atlanta that might get a local paper and find out, is that third baseman going to play tonight? Should I put him in my lineup? How badly is he hurt? Are they calling up that minor leaguer? Like all kinds of great community and activity going on. But I ran an ad. That's the first step you'll find in the WOW strategy, is to identify that ideal target who. I wanted absolutely rabid sports fans, and then I had to find out to create the O in the WOW strategy, the irresistible offer. I created an irresistible offer, and I can go into more detail than that if you get on my calendar. Go to the wowstrategy.com, and then I figured out the way to get my irresistible offer in front of that ideal target who, and the way was I had to think about, where are these rabid sports fans hanging out, and they were reading an obscure publication only for the most serious of sports fans called the Sporting News. They weren't reading Sports Illustrated. They weren't reading USA Today sports section. Those are for casual fans. They would go to something called the Sporting News, which at that time, I don't know if they still do or if they probably don't even publish anymore. But back then, they were the only publication that printed every single box score of every single major league game. So if you were an absolute rabid fan, you would buy the Sporting News and you would pore over for hours. It was a weekly publication. You'd pore over all, which I did, and my customers, my clients, my members did, my team owners, I call them. They would pore over every single box score of every single game from the previous week and look at every single lineup and who's playing where and who got one hit, 2 runs, a stolen base, a triple, a double, how many innings pitched, how many hit by pitch, how many stolen base, on and on and on. That's where they went. So that's where I ran this ad. I started with a tiny, tiny 2-inch ad that I've talked about before here. And again, you can get a hold of me and I can send you over a copy of it and all. Ends up, I didn't even know at the time why. Now I know why, and I call it the WOW strategy. Why that ad worked like crazy. It launched that business from, let's just give this thing a shot. And I went back to my high school job, and this is after I graduated from law school. And I went back to my high school job to earn enough money. I worked as a vendor in Madison Square Garden, walking up and down the seats selling beer and popcorn and pretzels and whatever, and ice cream, and you got it, you name it. And I had to earn enough money because I had to prepay for 3 weeks of that ad. That was the minimum. You had to pay in advance for 3 weeks of running the ad. So I had to make a couple of $1,000 to run the ad and to buy a Tandy 1000 personal computer. Way back in the beginning of the PC days, I got a Tandy 1000 computer and I had a 10 meg, not 10 gig, 10 meg external hard drive. That's how ridiculous personal computers were back then. And I ran the entire multi-million, it wasn't multi-million when it started, but it was a 6-figure business right off the bat. And then it grew so much that the next year I celebrated I had to get a 20 meg external hard drive. Oh man, the computing power that I needed to power that company. Anyway, I could go on and on, but man, brought back the memories here on Throwback Thursday when I saw a story about the Sporting News and fantasy sports. That's how my fantasy sports game company got its start, by a tiny little 2-inch classified ad in the back pages of the Sporting News way back in February 1985. I started the company my last year in law school in 84, and I went professional, as they say, with it. I was just doing it for friends and family, but I ran 1 league the first year, and then I had to run a 2nd league the next year, and then everybody wanted to get involved in this game, and one of the people in the league, one of my friends came to me and said, do you know, I found in the back of this Sporting News, there are these classified ads. There were other people running these fantasy sports games. We sent for their brochures. They weren't doing them well. The games weren't great. Their whole operation wasn't great. I said, of course, I can beat the crap out of them. And I did. But I got to tell you, I talked to so many people who say, oh, especially with social media, oh, I don't advertise. I don't, put money into advertising. I get all my business by word of mouth, as if that's a good thing. I get all my business by word of mouth. I mean, it's a good thing. It means you provide a good product or service if people are talking about you and referring people, but you can't scale. You can't grow with word of mouth. You can't count on it. It's not systemized. It's not and you can't scale to any size whatsoever. You need to master advertising. You need to be able to get the word out, and thanks to multiple platforms, you can easily scale up a business. You get an ad working on a small scale on a big platform like Amazon or Google or Facebook or Instagram or TikTok or whatever, and then, man, they got millions and billions of users. Then you just scale it up. I mean, the Sporting News back then didn't have millions and billions of readers. If they did, man, would I have built a much bigger company much faster. And that's what you can do today. But you can only do it when you master advertising, when you're getting the word out, paying for traffic, free traffic, organic traffic, whatever you want to call it. that's good to test your message and make sure it converts, make sure it works. Your irresistible offer is actually irresistible to your ideal target who. But once you understand that, I get all my business by word of mouth. Well, I guess you don't have any big goals, which is fine. You don't have to. But that's very small thinking. And I'm reminded of that today as I'm reminded of the Sporting News bought a fantasy sports game business and is going to launch their own fantasy sports game. And the Sporting News classified section is where I launched my very first fantasy sports game back in the early months of 1985 to get people to send in their money during the month of March for the baseball season of 1985 that began in April that year. I was well over six figures right away off that one little tiny ad. And then the rest is history. I just kept placing bigger and bigger and more ads in every publication I could think of where there were my ideal target who, and that thing just kept doubling and doubling and doubling and growing and growing and growing till I screwed it up. And unfortunately, I screwed it up in the pre-internet days because once the internet came in, bang, there are now multi-million, I think even billion-dollar companies in the fantasy sports game industry. And oops, I missed that boat. I didn't know anything really about business back then, but I knew enough to use the WOW strategy and master advertising, because then you can really grow a company, have a lot of fun, make a lot of money. And that'll do it for Throwback Thursday, September 14th, 2023. Thanks for being here today, and I will catch you back here again tomorrow on Foundation Friday. Until then, over and out. Bye-bye.